All right, how's it going? So in this video, it's just going to be a quick bench tech video. We're going to be going over doing a double inverted flare. So these are commonly known as 45-degree inverted brake flares. These are common on almost all brake lines on modern production vehicles, to where you just have the fitting clamp into the component that it's going to be sealing against, and the actual sealing surface is going to be on that end of the flare. So what I have is I have two different types of tools that will do exactly the same purpose. Both tools have their pluses and minuses. There's also a couple others out there on the market that can do the same thing. But essentially, those are kind of the two basic ones you can get. The price difference is quite a bit. And they both have their pluses and minuses. So we have our basic one that you can pick up for, $20, $30 at most tool source places. And then we have a bench mounted one that's in a vise. So obviously this one's got to be fixed to a bench. It works relatively quickly. You can hammer out lines really fast, to where this one you can do on the car. So there's applications for both of these types of brake line. This is good if you're building all new hard brake line on a vehicle. This is good if you're doing an in-frame repair. So they both have their purpose. So what we'll first do is, I just have a section of brake line to do a practice on, is we'll cut off the old flare so that we can get moving with making a new one. So what we have is a brake line cutting tool, and essentially what this is it just has a roller blade on it, and we're going to tension it up against the brake line. And while we do that, it's going to put a little bit of a crease in the pipe. We don't want to smash it, we just want to rotate the brake hose around to allow it to start to get a little bit of a crease in it, and we just increase pressure. What this tool is going to do is this is going to allow us to cut the brake line without denting or collapsing the hose, which is really important. So you can't do this with any type of pliers, cutters, or anything like that. And right there, we've cut off our old flare. We didn't collapse the tube at all, so this tube is ready to go. Usually is a good idea to go through and to take off any burr that's built up in the cutting process. But these cutters do a pretty good job of making the tube ready to go for the flaring technique. So this is kind of nice. Now this is just mild steel 3/16 double wall brake line. This is, again, pretty standard for any production vehicle on the market today. So it's important to understand what size brake tube you're using, because we got to go through a couple different dies for both tools to be able to size up which one we need. It's always important too. So this one already had the flare installed. I've done this a million times where I've gotten the flare on ready to go and then realize I didn't put the flare on, or the flare nut on. So make sure we have that fully installed and ready to go. Again, as I brought up, it's really important to pay attention to the sizing. So we're going to be going off of our 3/16 hole right there. And then it's also important to look and see what dies. Now the dies, you might not be able to see that, but that's marked 1/4. And we're 3/16 right here. So our first tool, we're going to loosen up. And then from here, we're going to slide the brake line in. And for this first part, to get the height right, usually it's good practice to go off of the little mandrel height. That's how high you want to get it. So we're going to go roughly that high and then clamp it down. You don't have to go aggro and tighten these down. There's some ribbing to grip the tube. We'll then put the die in, and then we'll pull our anvil, which I gotta thread out a little bit. Okay, from here we're gonna get that to where it's centered on our tool. So we've got the die acting against the jig here. It's being pulled tight. Want to double check and make sure our little wing nuts there are tight, and then we just start turning this down. All right, then once we've bottomed out, we can release it. We then remove our die, and then we go through with the tool, and then same thing. Turn it down. And you don't want to, crank this. What you can do is you can run the risk of, it is double wall tubing. So you do run the risk is if you crank it too tight, you can actually rip the inner portion of the flare where it needs to seal. So you don't want to go too terribly tight on it, or you could damage what you've been doing. Remove the line from the tool, and we got a flare that'll work. So it's kind of hard to do this with the camera on your head, but pretty much does the trick. Now what we'll do is we'll show you with this tool. So this tool is going to be similar in function to where we have a set of dies. This one obviously has to be vise mounted. I have already pre-selected the 3/16 dies, 45 degrees, and we just got to make sure we go in the right direction. Our dial here has where we need to start. So we have our OP0 is where they all start. So we'll get a new brake line cut, and then we'll start with that section. Use a tool to hold this so that it wouldn't slip out of my hands. So at this point, what we're going to do, we're going to place our brake tube inside of our jig. Make sure that the right end of the dies are up. And we'll place it out just sticking out a little bit farther past. We don't want to crank down too hard on it at this point, because what we're going to do is this section is going to size up the hose or push the hose into the dies to the right depth. So now we're at the right depth to where we can go to the next part. Usually I like to just put a little bit more of a crank down on the tube. The dies are meant to not crush it, but this way the tube won't slip. So we need to go to option 1, and we're 3/16, so we go to the green one. It's marked 3/16. I always do like to make sure that they're centered. There is a little detent in here that these things rotate on, and it's usually a good idea just to make sure that it's centered by giving it a little bit of a wiggle. So then we're going to line up and then crank it over. So that's our first one. So then we need to go to option 2, which option 2 is right here. Should be left with a good flare. So that's a flare that's ready to go. Fits into the fitting real nice. So the nice thing with this tool is this is able to hammer out these flares really, really fast. It doesn't put any grip on or lacerations on the tube like this guy does because of the little grip ridges that it has. But both of these tools are good tools for making flared brake lines. It's really important to make sure that when you're doing this, you get nice proper flares that are going to seal up against the component, whether or not it's against another brake line or into a soft line, whatever it may be. So it's really important to make sure that these flares kind of line up the way they're supposed to. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video, and I will see you in the next one.